The cruel bite of the auction gavel cut through the dusty air of Leadville, Colorado like a knife. As Zara Owens stood trembling on the makeshift platform, her wrists bound with rough rope that chafed her delicate skin. The year was 1879, and the mining boomtown was teeming with fortune seekers, desperate men, and those willing to profit from desperation, including her own flesh and blood. $200 for the girl, do I hear $250? Bellowed her Uncle Silas, his voice carrying across the crowded square where curious onlookers and potential buyers had gathered. His eyes, the same hazel shade as Zara's own, showed no familial warmth as they assessed the crowd for higher bids. Zara fought to maintain her composure, though inside she was screaming. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been living peacefully on her family's homestead outside of Denver. Then the influenza took her parents within days of each other, and before the dirt had settled on their graves, Uncle Silas had arrived to handle the affairs. He'd sold the farm, pocketed the money, and now, at 20 years old, Zara found herself being auctioned off like livestock. $250, called a gruff voice from the back. Zara's gaze darted to the source, a red-faced man with a substantial belly straining against his vest buttons. He leered at her, undressing her with his eyes. She knew what would become of her if he won this unholy auction. $300, drawled another voice, belonging to a gray-bearded miner whose dirty fingernails and alcohol-soaked breath were visible even from her position on the platform. $500. The crowd fell silent at the new bid, heads turning toward a tall figure leaning against a hitching post. The man straightened, pushing away from his relaxed position and stepping forward through the parting crowd. Zara's breath caught. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew his own strength, a lean, muscular frame topped by broad shoulders, and a face shadowed by the brim of his worn Stetson. As he approached the platform, she could see he was younger than she initially thought, perhaps late 20s, with eyes the color of a clear winter sky and a strong jaw dusted with several days' worth of stubble. $500, he repeated, his voice steady as he looked directly at Silas, deliberately avoiding staring at Zara like the others had. Cash in hand. Uncle Silas's eyes gleamed with greed. Well now, that's a generous offer for sure, mister. Finnegan Drake, the stranger replied, and I'll need a receipt. A ripple of surprised laughter ran through the crowd. A receipt for a human being. It was absurd, and yet it brought into stark relief the obscenity of what was transpiring, going once, going twice. Silas paused, scanning the crowd for any competing bids. When none came, he slammed his hand down on a wooden crate. Sold to the gentleman in the black hat. Finnegan approached the platform, counting out bills from a leather pouch. As he handed the money to Silas, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, without ceremony, the cowboy turned to Zara. "Miss," he said quietly as he climbed the 2 steps to stand beside her, pulling a knife from his belt. Zara instinctively flinched, but Finnegan only cut the ropes binding her wrists. "You're free to choose your life now." Confused, Zara rubbed her raw skin. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm not buying you," Finnegan clarified, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm buying your freedom. You can go wherever you please, do whatever you want. Your life is your own." Silas stepped forward, his face reddening with anger. "Now wait just a minute. The transaction is complete," Finnegan interrupted, his hand moving to rest casually on the revolver holstered at his hip. "The lady's free." "Unless you'd like to dispute that?" Silas's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water before he backed away, clutching the money to his chest. Zara stared at her rescuer in disbelief. In a world where women were often treated as property, where her own uncle had tried to sell her to the highest bidder, this stranger had stepped in and given her the most precious gift, choice. "Why?" she managed to whisper. Finnegan's expression softened slightly. "No one should be sold like cattle, least of all by their own kin." He offered his hand to help her down from the platform. "Come on, let's get away from this crowd." Still dazed, Zara placed her trembling hand in his and allowed him to guide her down. The crowd was already dispersing, some looking disappointed, others thoughtful. As they walked away, Zara felt the eyes of the town following them, and she was acutely aware that she now had her freedom but nowhere to go. "Mr. Drake," she said, stopping suddenly. "I'm grateful beyond words, but I have nothing. No home, no money, no family." Finnegan glanced down at her, then looked toward the setting sun. "There's a respectable boarding house at the edge of town run by a widow named Mrs. Hollister. I can escort you there, pay for a few nights' lodging until you decide what you want to do." Zara felt tears welling in her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" For the first time, Finnegan's stern expression cracked into something resembling a smile, just a slight upward turn at one corner of his mouth. "Let's just say I've got my reasons for disliking men who treat others as property." With that cryptic response, he began walking again, leading her away from the town square and the memory of her humiliation. Zara followed, her mind racing with questions about this mysterious cowboy and what would become of her now that she was, as he had said, free to choose her life. The widow Hollister's boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with green shutters and a well-tended flower garden. The widow herself was a plump, stern-faced woman in her 50s who regarded Finnegan and Zara with suspicion when they first approached her door. "Mrs. Hollister," Finnegan greeted, removing his hat. "I'm looking for a room for the lady. She's new to town and needs a respectable place to stay." The widow's gaze swept over Zara, taking in her simple dress, now dusty and wrinkled, and her unbound hair that had begun to escape its pins during the ordeal. "And what's your relation to her, Mr. Drake?" Mrs. Hollister asked pointedly. "None, madam." "Just offering assistance to someone in need." Mrs. Hollister's eyebrows rose. "I don't run that kind of establishment." Zara felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "Please, Mrs. Hollister, I'm alone in the world now and I need somewhere safe to stay while I find work. Mr. Drake has been kind enough to help me, but there's nothing improper between us." The widow studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well, I have a small room at the back. It's $5 a week, meals included." Finnegan immediately produced the money. "This should cover 2 weeks, with a little extra for any necessities she might need." Mrs. Hollister accepted the payment. "Supper's at 6 sharp. Don't be late or you'll go hungry till breakfast." She turned and walked back into the house, clearly expecting Zara to follow. Zara hesitated, turning to Finnegan. "How can I ever repay you?" The cowboy replaced his hat, adjusting it against the setting sun. "Live your life well, Miss Owens. Make your own choices. That's payment enough." He turned to leave, but Zara impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "Will I see you again?" Finnegan paused, looking down at her hand on his sleeve before meeting her eyes. "I expect you might. Leadville's not so big." With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Zara standing on the porch of her new temporary home, watching his retreating figure until Mrs. Hollister's impatient call drew her inside. The room was indeed small, barely fitting a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. But it was clean, and the window overlooked the garden. Most importantly, it was hers at least for 2 weeks. Zara sat heavily on the bed, the events of the day crashing over her. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she allowed herself to truly weep for them, for her lost home, for the humiliation she had suffered, and strangely, in gratitude for the enigmatic Finnegan Drake, who had appeared like an avenging angel just when she had given up hope. As her tears subsided, Zara made a vow to herself. She would find work, she would make her own way, and someday, somehow, she would repay Finnegan Drake for his kindness. But first, she would learn what had driven him to that auction square today, and why he had chosen to save a stranger from a fate worse than death. Morning came with the ring of Mrs. Hollister's breakfast bell. Zara, who had spent a restless night in her new bed, dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, the only clothes she now possessed, and made her way downstairs. The boarding house's dining room was occupied by 3 other residents: an elderly schoolteacher named Miss Perkins, a young bank clerk called Howard, and a middle-aged seamstress, Mrs. Chen, who had emigrated from China years ago. They regarded Zara with curious eyes as Mrs. Hollister introduced her simply as Miss Owens, our new boarder. Zara ate silently, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the whispers that occasionally drifted her way. News traveled fast in small towns, and she suspected at least some of them knew how she had arrived in Leadville. After breakfast, Mrs. Hollister pulled her aside. "I've put together some things for you," she said, handing Zara a bundle. "Just some old dresses of mine. They'll be too big, but Mrs. Chen has offered to help you take them in. Can't have you walking around town looking like you slept in a stable." Touched by the unexpected kindness, Zara thanked her. "I'll need to find work right away. Do you know of anyone hiring? As it happens, the Silver Queen Hotel is looking for a maid. It's honest work, though the hours are long and the pay isn't much, but it's a start." Mrs. Hollister's expression softened slightly. "And it'll keep you away from the saloons. Pretty girl like you would get offers, but that's no kind of life." Zara nodded, grateful for both the lead and the advice. "I'll go there today," after Mrs. Chen had helped her adjust one of the dresses, a simple blue cotton that made Zara's hazel eyes appear more green than brown. She set out for the Silver Queen Hotel. Leadville in daylight was a bustling place, the streets crowded with miners, businessmen, and wagons laden with supplies. The town had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the hills, and it had the raw, unfinished feel of a place still finding its identity. Wooden sidewalks lined the muddy Main Street, and buildings of varying quality stood shoulder to shoulder, saloons next to general stores, boarding houses beside law offices. The Silver Queen Hotel was one of the more impressive structures, 3 stories tall with a freshly painted facade and actual glass windows. Inside, the lobby featured an oriental carpet and a polished wooden reception desk where a harried-looking man in a suit was arguing with a guest. Zara waited patiently until the dispute was resolved, then approached. "Excuse me, sir. I heard you might be looking for a maid." The man, the hotel manager, Mr. Phillips, looked her up and down. "You have experience?" "I kept house for my parents' farm," Zara replied honestly. "I can clean, cook, mend, and I learn quickly." Mr. Phillips seemed to consider this. "It's hard work, 6 days a week, sunup to sundown, $1.50 a day. It wasn't much, but it would allow her to pay for her room and perhaps save a little. When can I start?" "Right now." "Go find Betsy in the laundry room. She'll show you what to do." And just like that, Zara had a job. The work was indeed hard, changing linens, scrubbing floors, emptying chamber pots, and hauling endless buckets of coal for the stoves and fireplaces. By the end of her first day, her hands were raw and her back ached, but she had earned her first independent wages. As she walked back to the boarding house in the fading light, Zara felt a small sense of accomplishment. She had taken the first step toward building her new life. But her thoughts kept returning to Finnegan Drake. Who was he? Why had he been so determined to help her? And where was he now? She got her answer to the last question when she rounded the corner onto Mrs. Hollister's street and nearly collided with the man himself. Finnegan steadied her with a hand on her arm, then quickly stepped back. "Miss Owens," he said, removing his hat. "I was just checking to see how you were settling in." Zara couldn't help but smile. "Mr. Drake, I've found employment at the Silver Queen Hotel." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "That was quick work." "I don't believe in wasting time," she replied, "or opportunities." They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Finnegan cleared his throat. "I also wanted to let you know that your uncle left town this morning, headed east on the stage, according to the station master." Relief flooded through Zara. She hadn't realized how much the thought of encountering Silas again had been weighing on her. "Thank you for telling me." Finnegan nodded, then seemed to struggle with what to say next. "Well, I should let you get on. You must be tired after your first day of work." As he turned to leave, Zara called after him. "Mr. Drake, would you? That is, Mrs. Hollister serves supper at 6. Perhaps you would join us." Finnegan hesitated, and for a moment Zara thought he would refuse, but then he gave a slight nod. "I'd be honored, Miss Owens." Supper was a somewhat strained affair. Mrs. Hollister clearly disapproved of Zara inviting a man to dine with them, though she said nothing outright. Miss Perkins peppered Finnegan with questions about his background, which he deflected with polite but vague answers. Howard, the bank clerk, seemed intimidated by the cowboy's presence and barely spoke, while Mrs. Chen observed everything with quiet amusement. Zara learned little about Finnegan during the meal, except that he had been in Leadville for only a few months, having come from Texas originally, and that he was currently working as a guide for mining companies, helping to scout new locations in the surrounding mountains. After supper, when Mrs. Hollister was occupied in the kitchen and the other boarders had retired to their rooms or the parlor, Zara found herself alone with Finnegan on the front porch. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said softly, "even though I know it made you uncomfortable." Finnegan leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the darkening street. "It's been a while since I've had a proper home-cooked meal or proper company." "You're a mysterious man, Mr. Drake. You saved me from a terrible fate, yet I know almost nothing about you." He glanced at her, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Not much to tell." "I don't believe that," Zara challenged gently. "A man doesn't step in to save a stranger without reason." Finnegan was silent for so long that Zara thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "My mother was sold much like you were. Different circumstances, different time, but same principle. Men treating women like property." He turned to face her fully. "I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." "Your mother," Zara began, but Finnegan shook his head. "That's a story for another time, if there is another time." He straightened and put his hat back on. "Thank you for the meal, Miss Owens. I wish you well in your new position." Before she could respond, he was down the steps and walking away into the night. Zara watched him go, more intrigued than ever by the enigmatic cowboy who had saved her life and then disappeared like a phantom. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm. Zara rose before dawn, worked her long shifts at the hotel, and returned to the boarding house exhausted but satisfied. She had already saved enough to pay Mrs. Hollister for another week's lodging, and Mrs. Chen had helped her sew 2 new dresses from fabric purchased at the general store. She saw Finnegan only twice during that time, once from a distance, as he rode out of town with several men who looked to be prospectors, and once when he tipped his hat to her as they passed on the street. Each time, her heart had quickened inexplicably. On her day off, Zara decided to explore more of Leadville. The town was larger than she had initially realized, with distinct neighborhoods ranging from the respectable business district to the rowdy area known as Stillborn Alley, where saloons and brothels operated day and night. She was careful to avoid the latter, instead browsing the shops along Harrison Avenue. She couldn't afford to purchase much, but it felt good to be out in the fresh air, making decisions about her own life. As she was admiring a display of books in the window of Leadville's small bookshop, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "The Brontes. Good choice." Zara turned to find Finnegan standing there, looking more presentable than she had yet seen him, clean-shaven, his hair trimmed, wearing a fresh shirt under his worn leather vest. "Mr. Drake," she greeted with a smile. "Are you a reader of novels?" "When I get the chance," he replied. "Though it's been a while, what about you?" "My mother taught me to read with Jane Eyre. I've always loved books." Zara's smile faded as she thought of her mother, gone now just like the family's small collection of beloved books that Sila's had probably sold off with everything else. Finnegan seemed to sense her melancholy. "Have you eaten lunch? There's a cafe just down the street that serves a decent meal." Zara hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." The cafe was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and windows that let in the midday sun. They ordered stew and biscuits, and for the first time, Zara found Finnegan willing to talk. He told her about growing up in Texas, the son of a former slave and a white rancher who had freed, and then married his mother in the years following the Civil War. It hadn't been an easy life. Many disapproved of their union, but it had been a loving home until Finnegan's father died when he was 16. "What happened then?" Zara asked, entranced by his story and the way his deep voice softened when he spoke of his parents. "My mother and I moved to a different town where no one knew us. She opened a small seamstress shop. I worked odd jobs, learned to break horses, eventually started riding with cattle drives." He took a sip of coffee. "When she passed 3 years ago, I headed west, ended up here." "I'm sorry about your mother," Zara said sincerely. "Mine died of influenza just last month, along with my father." And that's when your uncle took over, Finnegan concluded. It wasn't a question. Zara nodded. I never thought. I mean, he was my father's brother. How could he do such a thing? Some men lose their humanity when they see a chance for profit, Finnegan replied, his tone hardening. But you're free of him now, building your own life. Thanks to you, Zara said, impulsively reaching across the table to touch his hand. I don't know if I've properly expressed my gratitude. Finnegan looked down at her hand on his, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight part of his lips. For a moment, Zara thought he might turn his hand to clasp hers, but instead he gently withdrew. You don't owe me anything, Miss Owens, he said quietly, least of all your gratitude. The moment passed, and they finished their meal talking of lighter things, the characters they encountered at the hotel and on the trails, the changing autumn weather, the upcoming harvest festival that the town was planning. As they left the cafe, Finnegan offered to walk Zara back to the boarding house. The streets were busy with Saturday shoppers and miners coming into town for their weekly recreation, and Zara was grateful for his tall, protective presence beside her. Will you be attending the harvest festival? She asked as they neared Mrs. Hollister's. Hadn't planned on it, Finnegan admitted. Not much for crowds. Zara gathered her courage. I was thinking of going. It might be more enjoyable with company. Finnegan stopped walking and looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Are you asking me to escort you, Miss Owens? I suppose I am, Mr. Drake, she replied, holding his gaze despite the blush she could feel spreading across her cheeks. A long moment passed before Finnegan nodded once. Then I'd be honored to accompany you. He left her at the boarding house gate with a tip of his hat and a promise to call for her the following Saturday evening. Zara watched him walk away, her heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time since losing her parents, she felt something like hope blooming in her chest, hope not just for survival, but for happiness. The week leading up to the harvest festival seemed to crawl by. Zara threw herself into her work at the hotel, earning praise from Mr. Phillips for her diligence and attention to detail. In her spare moments, she worked with Mrs. Chen to create a new dress specifically for the festival, using fabric purchased with her carefully saved wages. The result was a simple but pretty gown of deep green cotton, with a modest neckline and sleeves that puffed slightly at the shoulders before tapering to her wrists. It wasn't the height of fashion, but it suited her slender figure and brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. On the day of the festival, Zara was so nervous that she dropped a stack of clean towels and broke a water pitcher at the hotel. Mr. Phillips, seeing her distress, surprised her by telling her to leave early. You've worked hard, girl. Go enjoy yourself, Mrs. Hollister helped her dress and arranged her light brown hair in a style more elegant than Zara could have managed on her own. You look lovely, child, the widow said with unexpected warmth. Your young man will be impressed. He's not my young man, Zara protested, though the thought sent a pleasant flutter through her stomach. Mrs. Hollister merely raised an eyebrow and handed her a shawl. The nights get cold early up here in the mountains. Don't stay out too late. Finnegan arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, and Zara's breath caught at the sight of him. He was dressed in what she assumed were his best clothes, a clean black shirt, a new-looking vest, dark trousers, and boots that gleamed with polish. His hat was the same worn Stetson, but he'd clearly brushed it. Most striking was his expression when he saw her descending the stairs, a look of such open admiration that Zara felt herself blush to the roots of her hair. Miss Owens, he greeted, removing his hat. You look beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Drake. You're quite handsome yourself. A faint color touched Finnegan's cheeks and he offered his arm. Shall we? The harvest festival was being held in the town square, which had been transformed with lanterns, hay bales, and tables laden with food brought by the townspeople. A small band played lively music, and couples were already dancing on a wooden platform erected for the occasion. Zara had half expected Finnegan to be uncomfortable in the festive setting, but he surprised her by seeming completely at ease. He procured cups of apple cider for them both and led her around the square, stopping to introduce her to people he knew, mostly men he had guided into the mountains. but also the blacksmith who shod his horse, the barber who had trimmed his hair, and the owner of the general store. It was the most relaxed she had seen him, and Zara found herself increasingly drawn to this man who contained so many contradictions, stern yet kind, reserved yet passionate about justice, solitary yet so at ease in this moment with her. When the band struck up a waltz, Finnegan turned to her with an outstretched hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Owens?" Zara placed her hand in his. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced." "Neither am I," he admitted as he led her onto the dance floor. "But I reckon we can figure it out together." His hand was warm at her waist, his other gently holding hers as they began to move to the music. They were both a bit stiff at first, too concerned with steps and proper distance, but gradually they relaxed into the rhythm. Zara found herself looking up into Finnegan's blue eyes, losing herself in their depth and the way they crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled down at her. "You're a natural," he murmured as he guided her through a turn. "I have a good partner," she replied softly. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been building since that first day at the auction. Finnegan's hand tightened slightly at her waist, drawing her a fraction closer than was strictly proper, and Zara didn't pull away. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break to sample the food at the communal tables. Zara was conscious of the curious and sometimes disapproving glances cast their way an unmarried young woman and a mysterious cowboy, clearly enjoying each other's company more than some thought appropriate. But for once in her life, she didn't care what others thought. As the evening grew cooler, Finnegan draped his jacket over her shoulders despite her protests. "My mother raised me to be a gentleman," he insisted, "at least in some ways." They walked to the edge of the festival where it was quieter, finding a bench beneath a cottonwood tree strung with lanterns. The music was still audible, but here they could talk without shouting over it. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Finnegan asked. "More than I can say," Zara answered honestly. "This is the first time I've truly felt free, happy even, despite everything that's happened." Finnegan's expression grew serious. "You deserve happiness, Zara." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. "So do you, Finnegan," she replied, testing his name on her own lips. It felt right. He looked at her for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, reached out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Zara felt herself leaning toward him almost unconsciously. "I should take you home," he said suddenly, withdrawing his hand. "It's getting late, and Mrs. Hollister will be wondering where you are." Disappointed but understanding his sense of propriety, Zara nodded. "Of course." They walked back to the boarding house in a silence that hummed with unspoken words and emotions. At the gate, Zara returned Finnegan's jacket and thanked him for the evening. "When will I see you again?" she asked, not caring if she sounded too forward. Finnegan hesitated. "I'm leaving tomorrow for a week-long scouting trip with some investors, but when I return." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "When I return, I'd like to call on you properly if you're amenable." Zara's heart soared. "I'm very amenable, Mr. Drake." A slow smile spread across his face, the first full smile she had seen from him, transforming his serious features into something almost boyish. "Good night, then, Miss Owens." "Good night, Mr. Drake." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but then stopped and faced her again. In 2 quick strides, he was back before her. Before Zara could react, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a brief, chaste kiss that nonetheless left her breathless. "Something to remember me by," he murmured, then turned and walked swiftly away into the night. Zara touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his. With a smile that wouldn't fade, she entered the boarding house, already counting the days until his return. The week of Finnegan's absence stretched endlessly for Zara. She threw herself into her work at the hotel, volunteering for extra shifts and tasks to keep her mind occupied. In the evenings, she sat with Mrs. Chen, learning more advanced sewing techniques that might someday allow her to seek better-paying work. Mrs. Hollister, who had softened considerably toward Zara over the weeks, noticed her restlessness. "Your young man will be back before you know it," she said one evening as Zara absently picked at her supper. "Men who look at a woman the way he looks at you don't stay away long." Zara blushed, but didn't contradict the widow's assumption that Finnegan was her young man. The memory of their kiss, brief as it had sustained her through the long days of separation. On the 8th day after the festival, Zara was changing linens in one of the hotel's finest rooms when she heard a commotion downstairs. Curious, she peered over the balcony railing to see a group of men entering the lobby, dusty and trail-worn. Her heart leaped when she recognized Finnegan among them, though he looked grim and was supporting one of the other men who appeared to be injured. Forgetting her duties, Zara hurried down the stairs. Finnegan glanced up as she approached, and despite the seriousness of the situation, his eyes warmed at the sight of her. "Miss Owens," he greeted formally, aware of their audience. "Mr. Drake," she replied, then gestured to the injured man. "What happened?" "Rockslide," Finnegan explained tersely. "Mr. Holloway here caught the worst of it. Is there a doctor in the hotel?" "No, but I can fetch Dr. Williams from his office. It's just down the street." Without waiting for a response, Zara grabbed her shawl from the hook by the staff entrance and hurried out. She returned with the doctor 10 minutes later to find that the injured man had been taken to a room. Finnegan was waiting in the lobby and rose when she entered. "That was quick thinking," he said. "Thank you. Will he be all right? Broken leg and some nasty cuts, but the doc says he'll live." Finnegan ran a hand through his hair, leaving it more disheveled than usual. "It could have been much worse. We were lucky." Zara wanted to throw her arms around him to assure herself that he was really here and unharmed, but the public setting and her position as a hotel employee made such a display impossible. Instead, she simply said, "I'm glad you're back safely." "So am I," Finnegan replied softly, his eyes conveying what neither of them could say aloud. Then, in a more normal tone, "I need to get cleaned up and report to the mining company, but I was hoping. That is, would you be free this evening?" "Yes," Zara answered quickly, too quickly, judging by the smile that tugged at Finnegan's mouth. "I finish my shift at 5. I'll come by the boarding house at 6 then." He hesitated, then added, "I've missed you, Zara." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through her chest. "I've missed you too, Finnegan." With a final look that lingered a moment too long to be merely friendly, Finnegan departed, leaving Zara to return to her duties with a lighter heart and anticipation building in her veins. True to his word, Finnegan arrived at the boarding house precisely at 6. He had bathed and changed, and Zara was struck anew by his handsome features, the strong line of his jaw, the clear blue of his eyes, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it met the collar of his clean shirt, Mrs. Hollister, playing the role of chaperone with unexpected zeal, informed them that they could sit in the parlor with the door open, or take a walk if they returned before dark. Choosing the latter option, Zara and Finnegan set out along the residential streets of Leadville. "Tell me about your trip," Zara prompted once they were alone. Finnegan described the rugged mountain terrain and the promising silver deposits they had discovered before the rockslide cut their expedition short. The investors were pleased despite the accident. "They're talking about opening a new mine, which means more work for the town." "And for you?" Zara asked. "Will you be guiding more expeditions?" "Probably," Finnegan admitted, "though I've been thinking lately about more permanent arrangements." Something in his tone made Zara glance up at him, but his expression was unreadable in the fading light. "What sort of arrangements?" Finnegan seemed to choose his words carefully. "I've saved some money, been thinking about buying land outside of town. There's a small ranch for sale, nothing fancy but good grazing land and a solid cabin." Zara's heart quickened. "You want to be a rancher?" "I grew up on a ranch," he reminded her. "I'm good with horses, and I'm tired of wandering, of not having a place that's my own." He paused, then added quietly, "or people who are my own." The implication hung in the air between them, too new and fragile to be addressed directly. Instead, Zara asked, "Have you seen this ranch?" "I'm going to look at it tomorrow," Finnegan replied. Would you like to come with me?" I'd value your opinion. It was a significant invitation not just to see a potential property, but to be involved in his plans for the future. I'd need to ask for the day off, Zara said, but yes, I'd like that very much. They walked in companionable silence for a while, eventually finding themselves at a small park on the outskirts of town. The sunset painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "It's beautiful here," Zara murmured, gazing at the vista. "Despite everything, I'm glad I came to Leadville." Finnegan turned to look at her, his expression suddenly serious. "Even though it wasn't your choice, it wasn't at first," she acknowledged. "But now I choose to stay." She met his eyes steadily. For more reasons than one, Finnegan stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Zara," he began, his voice lower than usual, "I know we haven't known each other long, but well, look who's enjoying the evening air." The drawling voice cut through the moment like a knife. Zara froze, a chill washing over her despite the mild temperature. She knew that voice. Turning slowly, she came face to face with her Uncle Silas. He looked much as he had the day of the auction, though his clothes were finer bought, no doubt, with the money he had stolen from her inheritance and earned from selling her like livestock. His hazel eyes, so similar to her own, glittered with malice as they moved from her to Finnegan. "Uncle Silas," Zara said coldly, "I thought you had left Leadville, came back for some unfinished business," Silas replied, his gaze fixed on Finnegan now. "I see you two have gotten friendly. Tell me, Cowboy, did you get your money's worth?" Finnegan's expression hardened, but his voice remained controlled. "Mr. Owens, I suggest you move along. Your niece wants nothing to do with you." Silas laughed, an ugly sound that raised the hairs on the back of Zara's neck. "My niece? No, you're mistaken. This here's my property." "I never signed any bill of sale." "I have a receipt," Finnegan replied evenly. "And more importantly, Miss Owens is a free woman making her own way. She belongs to no one but herself." "We'll see what the law has to say about that," Silas sneered. "I've been talking to some important men in this town. They're very interested in a story about a half-breed cowboy who stole a white man's property." Zara gasped at the slur and the threat. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would, girl, unless—" Silas's gaze turned calculating. "Unless you're willing to make a deal. Come with me now, no fuss, and I'll forget all about pressing charges against your protector here." Finnegan stepped forward, placing himself between Zara and her uncle. "There will be no deals. Miss Owens stays where she chooses, and if you attempt to bother her again, you'll answer to me." Silas's hand moved to his waist, and for a horrifying moment, Zara thought he was reaching for a gun. But instead, he simply adjusted his belt and smiled unpleasantly. "This isn't over," he said, backing away. "Not by a long shot." They watched as he sauntered down the street, disappearing around a corner. Only when he was gone did Zara release the breath she'd been holding and sag against Finnegan, who immediately wrapped a steadying arm around her waist. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently. Zara nodded, though she was trembling. "I can't believe he came back, and those things he said." "He can't hurt you," Finnegan assured her, his voice fierce with conviction. "I won't let him." "And his threats are empty. No court would uphold his claim, not when you're clearly a free adult who's supporting herself honorably." "It's not me I'm worried about," Zara admitted, looking up at him. "The way he spoke to you about you." "Finnegan, I'm afraid he might try to cause trouble for you because of your background." Finnegan's jaw tightened. "It wouldn't be the first time I've faced prejudice, but Leadville's a mining town. Folks here care more about a man's character than his parentage. And I've made friends here, people who would stand up for me if needed." Despite his reassurance, concern gnawed at Zara. "Perhaps we should tell the sheriff about Silas's threats." "That's a good idea," Finnegan agreed. "First thing tomorrow, but for now I should get you back to Mrs. Hollister's. It's getting dark, and after that encounter, I'd feel better knowing you're safe behind locked doors." They walked quickly back to the boarding house, both alert for any sign of Silas, but the streets remained quiet. At the gate, Finnegan took Zara's hands in his. "Try not to worry too much," he said gently. "We'll sort this out, and I still want to show you that ranch tomorrow if you're willing." Despite her anxiety, Zara managed a smile. "I'm still willing. I won't let Silas take any more from me, not my freedom, and certainly not my happiness." Finnegan's expression softened, and he leaned down to press a kiss to her forehead. "That's my brave girl. Now get inside and rest. I'll be here at 10 tomorrow morning." Zara squeezed his hands before reluctantly pulling away. "Good night, Finnegan. Good night, Zara. Sweet dreams." As she watched him walk away, Zara knew that despite her brave words, her dreams would likely be haunted by Silas's threats. But she also knew that, with Finnegan by her side, she had the strength to face whatever came next. The night passed fitfully for Zara, her sleep disturbed by dreams in which Silas pursued her through endless dark streets. She rose early, exhausted but determined not to let fear rule her day. Mr. Phillips had been unexpectedly understanding when she requested the day off, even wishing her an enjoyable outing when she mentioned she was going to see property outside of town. "Looking to settle down, are you?" he'd asked with a knowing smile. "That Drake fellow seems a steady sort." "You could do worse." Zara had blushed but didn't correct his assumption. In truth, she wasn't sure what Finnegan's invitation meant in terms of their relationship. Was he merely seeking her opinion as a friend, or was there more to it? The interrupted moment in the park had suggested the latter, but Zara was wary of reading too much into it. Finnegan arrived at the boarding house at precisely 10 o'clock, driving a borrowed wagon. He helped Zara up onto the seat beside him, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "You look tired," he observed as they set off. "Didn't sleep well?" "Not really," Zara admitted. "I kept thinking about Silas and what he might do." Finnegan's expression darkened. "I stopped by the sheriff's office this morning, told him about Silas's threats. Sheriff Harker knows me, I've guided him hunting a few times. He said he'd have a word with your uncle, make it clear that harassment won't be tolerated." Relief washed over Zara. "Thank you. I hope that will be the end of it." "So do I," Finnegan replied, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. "But let's not let him ruin our day. The ranch is about 5 miles outside of town, not too far for trips in for supplies, but far enough to have some peace." As they left Leadville behind, the scenery changed from the cluttered bustle of the mining town to open meadows and stands of aspen trees just beginning to turn golden with autumn. The mountains rose majestically in the background, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Zara found herself relaxing as they drove, the fresh air and beautiful vistas washing away her anxiety. Beside her, Finnegan pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the local wildlife he'd encountered on his scouting trips. His knowledge of the land was impressive and his obvious love for it infectious. "There it is," he said eventually, gesturing ahead to where a small cabin stood in a clearing beside a creek. "Blackwell Ranch, or that's what it's called now. I'd change the name if I bought it." The cabin was sturdy-looking if somewhat weathered, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch across the front. A barn and corral stood nearby, and beyond that, fenced pastures stretched toward a line of trees. It wasn't grand by any means, but it had a welcoming, homey feel that appealed to Zara immediately. "It's lovely," she said as Finnegan helped her down from the wagon. "So peaceful." "Wait till you see inside," Finnegan replied, a boyish enthusiasm lightening his usually serious demeanor. "The owner's meeting us here, but he gave me permission to show you around the property first." They walked the boundaries of the ranch together, Finnegan pointing out the good grazing land, the reliable creek that would provide water even in dry seasons, and the wooded area that would supply plenty of firewood and game. Zara listened attentively, asking questions that seemed to please him with their practicality. "You know a lot about ranching," he observed as they made their way back toward the cabin. "I grew up on a farm," she reminded him. "Many of the principles are the same." "And I always helped my father with the planning and accounts." Finnegan nodded thoughtfully. "A smart woman is worth her weight in gold on a ranch. My mother used to say that while my father might have built their home, it was she who made it prosper." The casual reference to a woman's role in ranch life and the implied comparison between his mother and Zara sent a flutter through her chest. Before she could respond, however, they spotted a rider approaching. "That'll be Mr. Blackwell," Finnegan said. Let's go meet him. Ellis Blackwell proved to be a gruff but fair-minded man in his 60s who was selling the ranch to move to Denver, where his daughter and grandchildren lived. He showed them through the cabin, which was simply furnished but clean and well-maintained, with 2 bedrooms, a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a root cellar beneath. "Built it myself 30 years ago," Blackwell explained with pride. "Never a leak in the roof or a crack in the foundation. It's very well constructed," Zara commented, running her hand along a smooth wooden countertop. "And the layout is practical?" Blackwell glanced at her with new interest. "You know something about building, miss." "My father was a carpenter before he took up farming," Zara explained. "He taught me to appreciate good craftsmanship." The old rancher nodded approvingly, then turned to Finnegan. "Your wife has a good eye. You two planning on starting a family soon. The 2nd bedroom's perfect for little ones." Zara felt heat rush to her cheeks, but before she could correct the misunderstanding, Finnegan spoke. "Miss Owens is a friend who was kind enough to give her opinion on the property. We're not married." If Blackwell was embarrassed by his assumption, he didn't show it. "Well, it's still a fine place for a family whenever that comes along." He winked at Zara, causing her blush to deepen. "Now, let's discuss the price." Finnegan and Blackwell stepped outside to talk business, leaving Zara alone in the cabin. She walked slowly through the rooms, imagining what it would be like to live in such a place, to wake up to the sound of birds instead of hotel guests, to cook meals on the cast iron stove, to sit by the fireplace on cold winter evenings. And almost against her will, she found herself imagining sharing those quiet moments with Finnegan, his strong presence beside her on the porch as they watched the sunset, his deep voice reading aloud by the fire, his gentle hands cradling their child. The thought should have alarmed her. They had known each other barely a month, had shared only the briefest of kisses, but instead, it felt right. As if the path that had begun with her humiliation at the auction block had always been leading her here, to this cabin, to this possibility of a life she hadn't dared to dream of. Zara was standing by the window, lost in thought, when Finnegan re-entered the cabin. The expression on his face told her immediately that something had changed. "What is it?" she asked. "Did you agree on a price?" "We did," Finnegan confirmed, coming to stand beside her. "But that's not why I look. However, I look right now." He took a deep breath. "Blackwell told me something." "About your uncle." Zara's stomach clenched. "What about him?" "Apparently Silas came out here yesterday, asking about the property. Told Blackwell he was interested in buying it as a surprise for his niece for you." "That's ridiculous," Zara said, anger replacing her fear. "He stole everything I had. Why would he buy me a ranch?" "He wouldn't," Finnegan agreed grimly. "My guess is he saw us together in town, maybe overheard something about my interest in the property and decided to interfere." "But why? What would he gain?" Finnegan's expression hardened. "Control. If he couldn't force you to go with him, maybe he thought he could prevent you from having a future here with me or anyone else." Blackwell said Silas made an offer, but it was insultingly low. He had no intention of actually buying the place. "So he was just trying to cause trouble," Zara concluded, her hands curling into fists. "To ruin any chance of happiness I might find here. That would be my guess." Finnegan hesitated, then added, "There's something else." Blackwell mentioned that Silas wasn't alone. He had 2 men with him, rough-looking characters who stayed on their horses while Silas talked. A chill ran down Zara's spine. "You think he hired men to, what, intimidate you, hurt you, or to take you by force if his other plans fail?" Finnegan said bluntly. "I don't want to frighten you, Zara, but we need to be careful. Silas isn't giving up easily." Zara felt her knees weaken, and she sank onto a nearby chair. The fear she'd been holding at bay since encountering Silas in the park now threatened to overwhelm her. "What should we do?" Finnegan knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "First, we should get back to town before dark. I'll speak to the sheriff again, tell him what Blackwell told me, and then, well, I think it might be best if you don't go out alone until we're sure Silas has left town for good." "I can't hide forever," Zara protested. "I have to work to live my life." "I know," Finnegan assured her, "and you will. This is just temporary until we deal with Silas." He squeezed her hands gently. I won't let him take your freedom again, Zara, I promise you that. Looking into his earnest blue eyes, Zara felt her fear recede. Whatever Silas planned, she wasn't facing it alone this time. I trust you, she said simply. Finnegan's expression softened, and for a moment it seemed he might say more. But then Blackwell called from outside, asking if they were ready to leave, and the moment passed. As they drove back to Leadville, the beauty of the landscape that had enchanted Zara on the outward journey now seemed shadowed by threat. Every cluster of trees might hide Silas and his hired men, every rise in the road might conceal an ambush. She found herself pressing closer to Finnegan's side, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Did you make a deal with Mr. Blackwell?" she asked, seeking distraction from her dark thoughts. "For the ranch, I mean. We shook hands on it," Finnegan confirmed. "If all goes well, I'll own Blackwell Ranch or whatever I decide to call it by the end of the month." "That's wonderful," Zara said sincerely. "It's a beautiful place." "You'll be happy there." Finnegan glanced at her, then returned his attention to the road. "I hope so," he said softly, "but there's something else I need to sort out before I can truly call it home." Before Zara could ask what he meant, they crested a hill and Leadville came into view, the late afternoon sun glinting off church steeples and the metal roofs of the larger buildings. It looked peaceful, civilized, a stark contrast to the wild uncertainty that now clouded their future. They arrived back at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house just as dusk was falling. Finnegan helped Zara down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "I'll walk you to the door," he said, his tone making it clear he wouldn't take no for an answer. At the door, Zara turned to face him. "Thank you for today, despite everything. I enjoyed seeing the ranch with you." Finnegan's expression softened. "So did I." He hesitated, then added, "Zara, there's something I've been wanting to say," but once again they were interrupted, this time by Mrs. Hollister opening the door. "There you are, child. I was beginning to worry. Supper's nearly ready and you have a visitor waiting in the parlor." "A visitor?" Zara repeated, instantly alert. "Who is it?" "A gentleman by the name of Jenkins. Says he's a lawyer from Denver with news about your parents' estate." Zara and Finnegan exchanged alarmed glances. "I don't know any lawyer named Jenkins," Zara whispered, "and as far as I know, everything was already settled or stolen by Silas." "It could be legitimate," Finnegan said, though his tone was doubtful, "but I don't like it. Let me come in with you." They followed Mrs. Hollister into the house and toward the parlor, where a thin man in an expensive suit sat with a leather portfolio on his lap. He rose when they entered, his eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Finnegan. "Miss Owens, I'm Thaddeus Jenkins, attorney at law. I've come about your inheritance." Zara felt Finnegan's reassuring presence behind her as she faced the supposed lawyer. "What inheritance, Mr. Jenkins? My uncle sold my parents' farm and all their possessions." Jenkins smiled thinly. "Not all, it seems. Your mother had a small account at the Bank of Denver, unknown to your uncle. As her only child, you are the rightful heir. I've brought the paperwork for you to sign." It sounded plausible, and yet something felt wrong. Zara glanced at Mrs. Hollister. "Would you mind fetching us some tea, Mrs. Hollister?" The widow looked between Zara and the lawyer, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "Of course, dear, I'll be right back." As soon as Mrs. Hollister left the room, Zara's demeanor changed. "Who are you really, and what does Silas want?" Jenkins's smile disappeared. "Clever girl. But not clever enough." His hand moved to his jacket, and suddenly a small pistol appeared, pointed directly at Zara. "Now, let's make this simple. You're coming with me, nice and quiet. Your uncle's waiting with a carriage just down the street." Finnegan stepped forward, placing himself partially between Zara and the gun. "Put that away before you get hurt," he said, his voice deadly calm. Jenkins laughed. "Big talk from a man facing a loaded gun. Step aside, half-breed. This isn't your concern." "It became my concern the moment I bought this woman's freedom," Finnegan replied, not moving an inch, "and I don't take kindly to having that purchase disputed." "Your mistake," Jenkins sneered, cocking the pistol. "Last chance to step aside." What happened next occurred so quickly that Zara could barely follow it. Finnegan lunged forward, knocking Jenkins's arm upward just as the gun discharged. The bullet lodged in the ceiling as the two men grappled for control of the weapon. Despite his slender build, Jenkins was surprisingly strong, and for a terrifying moment it seemed he might prevail. Then Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway, not with tea but with a sawed-off shotgun that she pointed unerringly at Jenkins. "Drop it," she commanded, her voice as hard as iron. "Or I'll blow you to kingdom come." Jenkins froze, his eyes darting between the widow's determined face and the twin barrels aimed at his chest. Slowly, he uncurled his fingers from the pistol, allowing Finnegan to take it. "Sit down," Finnegan ordered, now holding Jenkins's own gun on him. "Zara, go fetch the sheriff. Mrs. Hollister will help me make sure our guest stays put." Zara hesitated, reluctant to leave Finnegan even though she knew he was now in control of the situation. "Are you sure?" "Go," he urged. "And be careful. Remember, Silas is supposedly waiting nearby." Nodding, Zara hurried out, keeping to the shadows and glancing nervously in all directions as she made her way to the sheriff's office. She found Sheriff Harker just finishing his supper and quickly explained the situation. "Been expecting something like this," the sheriff admitted as he buckled on his gun belt and called to his deputy. "That uncle of yours has been causing trouble all over town today. Had to chase him out of the Silver Queen Hotel when he tried to claim you were his runaway servant." By the time they returned to the boarding house, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Inside, they found Finnegan and Mrs. Hollister still guarding a sullen Jenkins. "Found this on him," Finnegan said, handing the sheriff a folded paper. "It's a counterfeit bill of sale listing Zara as the property of Zara Owens." Sheriff Harker examined the document, his expression darkening. "Forgery, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon. Your friend's looking at a long stretch in prison, Miss Owens." "He's no friend of mine," Zara replied firmly. "What about my uncle? You said he was supposed to be waiting with a carriage. We'll find him," the sheriff assured her, directing his deputy to take Jenkins into custody. "In the meantime, I suggest you both stay here, doors locked. I'll post a man outside just to be safe." After the sheriff and his prisoner had departed and the curious onlookers had been sent away, Mrs. Hollister surprised Zara by pouring 3 glasses of her prized blackberry cordial. "For the nerves," she explained, handing them around. "Lord knows we could all use it after that excitement." They sat in the parlor, the cordial warming Zara from the inside as the full impact of what had just happened washed over her. "I can't believe Silas would go to such lengths," she said shakily. "Hiring a man to impersonate a lawyer, creating false documents. Men like your uncle don't give up easily when their pride is wounded," Mrs. Hollister observed grimly. "And you wounded his pride badly when you escaped his control." "It's more than that," Finnegan added, his expression troubled. "He hates the fact that I was the one who freed you. That's why he keeps bringing up my background, trying to make this about race rather than his own criminal behavior." Zara reached for his hand, not caring what Mrs. Hollister might think. "None of that matters. What matters is that you saved me twice now." To her surprise, Mrs. Hollister didn't look scandalized by the gesture. Instead, the older woman nodded approvingly. "It's not every day a man risks his life for a woman who isn't even his wife," she remarked. "Shows character." Finnegan's eyes remained on Zara's face, his expression softening. It wasn't a difficult choice. The intensity of his gaze made Zara's heart race, and she found herself unable to look away. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions, until Mrs. Hollister cleared her throat. "Well, I think I'll check on supper," the widow announced, rising from her chair. "Should be salvageable despite the interruption." She paused at the door. "I'll just be in the kitchen, right through that door there, the very nearby kitchen." Her meaning couldn't have been clearer. She was giving them a moment of privacy while remaining close enough to preserve propriety. As soon as she was gone, Finnegan moved to sit beside Zara on the settee, still holding her hand. "This isn't how I imagined this day going," he admitted, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I wanted it to be perfect, showing you the ranch, maybe finding the courage to tell you what I've been trying to say for days." "Tell me now," Zara urged softly. "Whatever it is, I want to hear it." Finnegan took a deep breath. When I saw you on that auction platform, something inside me couldn't bear it. I told myself I was just doing what any decent man would do, but it was more than that, even then. And every day since, every moment I've spent with you, has only confirmed what I think I knew from the first, that you're the woman I've been waiting for my whole life. Zara's breath caught in her throat. Finnegan. I know it's fast, he continued, his blue eyes earnest. I know you've only just gained your freedom, and the last thing I want to do is take choices away from you. But I also know that life can be short and unpredictable, and I don't want to waste another day not telling you how I feel. He squeezed her hand gently. I love you, Zara Owens. And if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you on that ranch or anywhere else you choose. Tears filled Zara's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. For so long her life had been decided by others, first her parents, though with love, then Sela's with cruelty. Now Finnegan was offering her a choice, the most important choice of her life, and he was offering it with love and respect for her agency. I love you too, she whispered, the words coming easily now that they'd been spoken. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you cut those ropes and told me I was free. And every day since then, you've shown me what kind of man you are: honorable, kind, brave. She reached up to touch his cheek. I would be proud to build a life with you, Finnegan Drake. The smile that broke across Finnegan's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds, radiant and transformative. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Zara met him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, communicating all the emotion that words couldn't contain. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Finnegan rested his forehead against hers. Does this mean you'll marry me, Zara Owens? Zara laughed softly, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. Yes, Finnegan Drake, it means exactly that. A discreet cough from the doorway announced Mrs. Hollister's return. Supper's ready, she announced, though her knowing smile suggested she was well aware of what she had interrupted. And it seems we have something to celebrate. News of their engagement spread quickly through Leadville. Most reactions were positive. The hotel staff offered congratulations, Mrs. Chen promised to help with a wedding dress, and even Mr. Phillips grudgingly granted Zara time off for the ceremony. There were a few raised eyebrows and whispered comments about Finnegan's mixed heritage, but in a frontier town where a man was judged primarily by his actions, such prejudice held less sway than it might have elsewhere. Sela's was captured 2 days later, trying to leave town on the morning stage. With his hired lawyer already in custody and willing to testify against him in exchange for leniency, Sela's faced serious charges. The sheriff assured Zara that her uncle would be spending several years in the territorial prison, more than enough time for her to begin her new life without fear. Finnegan completed the purchase of the Blackwell Ranch, which he immediately renamed Drake Ranch. He spent every available moment preparing it for their arrival after the wedding, hiring men to repair the barn roof and refresh the cabin's interior. Zara visited whenever she could get away from her duties at the hotel, offering suggestions and planning where furniture would go. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Leadville's small church. Zara wore a dress of ivory satin that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, with blue ribbons that matched Finnegan's eyes. Her hair was adorned with wildflowers gathered that morning from the meadows near their new home. Finnegan, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, looked at her with such love as she walked toward him that Zara's heart felt it might burst from happiness. Mrs. Hollister dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Miss Perkins and Mr. Phillips from the hotel beamed from the pews. Even gruff Ellis Blackwell had come to town for the occasion, bringing with him a hand-carved rocking chair as a wedding gift. The minister spoke of love, commitment, and building a life together, but Zara barely heard the words. All she could focus on was Finnegan's face, his hands holding hers and the promise of the future stretching before them. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister finally declared. You may kiss your bride. Finnegan didn't hesitate, drawing Zara into an embrace that was both tender and possessive. The assembled guests broke into applause, and Zara felt a sense of rightness of coming home that she had never experienced before. That evening, they drove out to Drake Ranch in the same wagon that had first taken them there, though now it was loaded with wedding gifts and the few possessions Zara had accumulated during her time in Leadville. As they approached the cabin, Zara gasped in delight. Finnegan had hung lanterns from the porch rafters and surrounding trees, creating a magical welcome to their new home. "It's beautiful," she breathed as he helped her down from the wagon. "Not as beautiful as you," Finnegan replied, and then, to her surprise, he swept her into his arms. "Tradition says I should carry you over the threshold." Zara laughed as he carried her up the porch steps and through the door, setting her down gently in what was now their home. The cabin had been transformed since her first visit. Curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed visible through the open bedroom door, and a fire crackled welcomingly in the hearth. "When did you do all this?" Zara asked, amazed at the homey touches. "I had some help," Finnegan admitted. "Mrs. Chen sewed the curtains and Mrs. Hollister contributed the quilt, said it was her wedding gift to us, that and her blessing, which apparently is worth its weight in gold." "It is," Zara agreed, thinking of how the stern widow had become almost motherly toward her. "Everyone has been so kind. They care about you," Finnegan said simply. "As do I." He drew her into his arms again, his expression growing serious. "Zara Drake, my wife, I still can't quite believe it." "Believe it," Zara murmured, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm yours and you're mine, and nothing will ever separate us." As his lips met hers in a kiss that held the promise of the night to come and all the days that would follow, Zara knew that her journey had truly come full circle. From the humiliation of the auction block to the joy of this moment, she had found not just freedom but love, a love born of respect, choice, and the courage of a cowboy who had seen her worth when no one else would. In the years that followed, Drake Ranch prospered. Finnegan's knowledge of horses proved valuable, and soon they were known throughout Colorado territory for the quality of their stock. Zara managed the household and kept the accounts, and as Mrs. Hollister had predicted, her intelligence and practical nature contributed greatly to their success. Their family grew with the arrival of a son, James, in their second year of marriage, followed by a daughter, Rose, 2 years later. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk and developing the same love for the land that their parents shared. Zara Owens served his prison sentence and then disappeared from their lives, reportedly heading to California to try his luck in the gold fields there. His departure removed the last shadow from Zara's happiness. On the 5th anniversary of the day Finnegan had purchased her freedom, Zara found him sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a thoughtful expression on his face. She joined him, leaning against his shoulder as they gazed out at the mountains painted gold by the dying light. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, though she had a suspicion. "About how different our lives might have been if I hadn't gone into town that day," Finnegan replied, slipping an arm around her waist. "If I hadn't seen you on that platform." "I think about that too," Zara admitted. "How close I came to a life of servitude, or worse, and how instead I found freedom and love." Finnegan turned to look at her, his blue eyes as vivid and captivating as they had been the first time she saw them. "Do you ever regret it, coming here with me, taking on the hard work of ranch life?" Zara shook her head emphatically. "Never, not for a single moment." She leaned up to kiss him softly. "You gave me the greatest gift, Finnegan, the freedom to choose my life, and I chose you. I will always choose you." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that was now so deeply a part of them, Zara thought about the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her here. From the darkest moment of her life had come the greatest joy, a reminder that even in the wild and often brutal West, love and decency could triumph, and a life built on choice was the most precious possession of all. In the distance, they could hear their children's laughter as they played near the creek, and closer, the comforting sounds of their home, the creak of the porch swing, the whisper of the breeze through the aspen leaves, the soft nickering of horses in the nearby corral. Sounds of the life they had built together, the life they had chosen. And as twilight deepened into night, Zara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be beside the man who had freed her body and captured her heart, under the vast Colorado sky that promised infinite possibilities for all the days to come.